Erosion is an important social, environmental and economic problem in the 21st century due to the enhancement of human influences. Erosion is the movement of soil material by wind, rain, overland flow and gravity, and by studying the rate of erosion in an ecosystem post-human influence, the overall health and function of the ecosystem can be assessed. The rate of erosion is influenced by many factors, two of them being the particle size of the soil and also the uniformity of the slope. These two factors and their associated effect on the rate of erosion and amount of runoff were the variables tested over 2 weeks on the 19th and 26th of October. Other parameters that were also considered were the nature of the soil, the size of the area studied, and the slope, steepness, and length. The soils used in this experiment came from the Pilbara, however the exact location is only assumed. The Pilbara has a semi-arid to arid climate, with rainfall averaging about 250 to 400 mm during the summer months due to high thunderstorm and cyclonic activity in this area. Temperatures associated with this area are very high during summer, often exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, with milder winter months. In the Pilbara, the most extensive soils are shallow stony soils, which we assumed were used during the second week of the experiment as there was a high rock content. It was also assumed that the rest of the experiment soil used was found in the saline alluvial plains in the Pilbara, as they looked very similar to a clayey loam. These clayey loams are highly susceptible to erosion. Soil erosion is only a serious problem in some localized areas in the Pilbara due to overgrazing and other human influences. The stony soils' rate of erosion was compared to a soil with a lower rock content to calculate the effect on erosion and runoff. Surface rocks protect the soils from high rainfall intensities and raindrop detachment, and also alter the overland flow discharge, in turn decreasing the soil sediment transport capacity and increasing the infiltration rate. Infiltration should be higher in a rocky soil as the overland flow allows water into the protected areas under the rock fragments due to soil self-armouring. Variations in hill slope topography were also tested, as most natural hill slopes are not uniform, causing different runoff and erosion rates. Previous studies have shown that concave slopes produce the least amount of sediment loss compared to a uniform or convex slope. There is much variation in studies of this kind due to the wide variety of variables across studies. These variables can include the spatial variability, the amount of sediment that can become trapped in depressions across the slope, variations in soil quality, and also the intensity of the rainfall. These experiments were conducted to test the effect different variables, specifically rock content and uniformity of the slope, have on the rate of erosion and runoff in soils found in the Pilbara. The experiments were conducted over 2 weeks in the context of a laboratory.
Within this experiment, we covered 2 separate experiments to examine 2 of the factors which influence erosion rates. The first of these experiments looked at how variations in rock content affect runoff and erosion. The first week's simulation used a soil with rock content made up of about 5% of the surface area, meaning 95% of the soil was an exposed clay loam. The second week's model was set up in the same fashion, but with a different soil, which had about 20 to 25% of the soil area covered by rock. The rainfall simulation was set up to imitate the periodic high-intensity rainfall seen in the Pilbara, by having 3 seconds of high-intensity rainfall every 10 seconds. Runoff was collected every 3 minutes for 30 seconds to get an idea of how the runoff and erosion developed over time. The runoff was weighed and then dried for at least 48 hours in an oven to get rid of the water content. Then it was re-weighed to assess the weight of erosional matter. As the rainfall simulator had no means of recording rainfall intensity concurrently with the experiment, 3 replicates of collection jars with known diameters were placed under the spray to measure water collection throughout the experiment, so rainfall intensity could be calculated later. Here is a video of the experiment in process. The 3 tubs were measured individually to create replicates of the results.
You can keep track of the time on your spreadsheet and just do the numbering. That's right.
The second topic that was looked at was the rate of erosion depending on the shape of the slope. Flat, convex and concave shaped slopes with the same overall angle of 28 degrees were set up. In this experiment, a clay loam from the Pilbara was used in all tubs. Rainfall was simulated by sprinklers which had a flow rate of 220 millilitres a minute, and runoff was then measured with collection tubs for 3 minutes every 20 minutes. The tubs were then weighed with the water and sediment, then dried for 48 hours in the oven, and then re-weighed to get the weight of the sediment only. These diagrams show the 3 setups that were used in the experiment, with soil shaped as flat, concave and convex. The dimensions of the tub were the same for each of the experiments, and the placement of the rainfall sprinklers is seen in Figure 2.
Start whenever.
Yep, go.
Okay, so for our experiment, we have a rainfall of 220, we have a slope of 28 degrees, and we are using a mix of clay loam? Yes, clay loam.
Go. Graphs A and B show the results of 2 replicates of the rocky soil runoff part of the experiment, in blue and red. The green line shows the average of the 2 replicates. There is an overall trend of increasing rate of runoff and a decreasing rate of erosion throughout the experiment. Graph C takes the average values of the 2 replicates of the rocky soil to compare with the average values of the non-rocky soil data, so we can see the rate of runoff over time between the 2 variables. It seems that both experiments showed an overall increase of runoff over time. Graph D uses the same method as Graph C, but with the erosional rate instead of the rate of runoff. This graph is the first part of the results from the topography experiment. It shows the average rates of erosion from between 1 and 3 replicates of the 3 variables, convex, concave and flat. Convex is in blue, flat is in red and green, and concave is in green. This graph was made in the same manner as the previous one, but it shows runoff instead of erosion. Again, convex is in blue, the no topography is in red, and the concave slope is in green.
Overall, the experiment was split into 2 separate experiments and tested 2 types of experimental designs in their ability to simulate soil erosion under different conditions, as explained previously. Both experiments attempted to simulate the heterogeneity in hill slopes in terms of their geometry and soil-to-rock content. Results generally showed that both simulations were able to effectively recreate and measure soil erosion during a rainfall event in a given area. In the first experiment, the general trend observed was an increase in the rate of water runoff, as shown previously in graphs A and C, and a fall in the erosion rate, as shown in graphs B and D. This occurred due to the fact of the soil becoming self-armoured from the large rocks within, which acted as a barrier against surface erosion, i.e. the transport of entrained particles. A main point to carry through is that the small soil grains that are not as tightly packed are easily eroded away, leaving behind those that are less easily eroded through time. Some complications included miscalculated measurements during the recording time of samples. For example, not all of them were measured for the exact time of 30 seconds, some went over by 1.5 to 2 times of the measuring time. A recommendation is to include more replicates run onto different rainfall simulators, instead of at the same time under the same simulation. This is because it may produce results more able to be recreated, since they will take into account more experimental variation. From the second experiment, the results showed a general decrease in the rate of soil erosion through time during a rainfall event, as shown previously in graph E. This can be explained by the water eroding away the smallest and lightest particles, mostly silt and clay. This was because the energy of the runoff was not great enough to transport the larger, heavier particles, aggregates, and compacted material in the soil. There were also some rocks up to 3 centimeters in the soil that created a little bit of soil armoring and hence caused a decrease in the surface flow rate and an inferred increase in infiltration. This was most apparent in flat and convex topography. Concave topography had a relatively small amount of runoff, which also decreased slightly through time. This was because the geometry of it didn't allow for easy water flow, and hence the entrained particles could not be transported. In the hill slope, flat topography had the greatest amount of erosion and concave the lowest. Because the soil was very clay-rich, clay particles could have formed electrostatic forces between each other and hence made aggregates. These aggregates need a relatively high velocity to break up the particles from each other after all the less compacted sediments are washed away. This could also explain the decreasing trend seen in the erosion rate through time. Most of the complications undergone in the experiment revolved around the setup. There were too many variables, 2 different types of soil, 2 experimental designs, and 2 groups which did both experiment 1 and 2 with varying aims in data acquisition. There were also not enough controlled variables. In future, it would be highly beneficial to eliminate the vast number of variables in the experiment. There was a complication with the 2 weeks of data that didn't match with the first aim, so that called for a complete aim reboot. Experimental design could have been improved if the amount of control variables were increased. For example, the experiment of the group, the wetness of the soil, the type of soil, etc. This could have been avoided by keeping the groups constant if there were 2 different experiments. Therefore, data could have been much easier to correlate and analyze after. And also, finally, setting a solid aim is highly beneficial for future experiments, along with the pros and cons of testing the said aim. Overall, both experiments were able to achieve and quantify soil erosion effectively within 2 different simulations. The data mainly showed a decrease with erosion rate over a period of time during a rainfall event. This occurred alongside an increase in the flow rate of the water. The main contributors to the decrease in erosion rate were the appearance of large rock fragments in the soil, the geometry of the hill slope, and also the clay content of the soil. This could show the importance of increasing self-armouring within an easily erodible terrain, or with the introduction of more concave topographies within a hill slope. Thanks for watching!